all of us are deaf or somewhat hard of hearing. Is that true for you? At one time in our history, most colonial settlers to New England didn't hear that Native Americans were fully human. With rights to be fully respected, they were deaf to that. Though they had the same Bible we have, the same stories of Moses, the prophets, and Christ. But the lesson they heard from those sources was that God intended the colonists to tame the land and convert the natives. The fact that diseases brought by Europeans had wiped out whole native tribes was heard as confirmation of God's intent for colonists to prevail. Very soon, the same European colonists, our forefathers, didn't hear that Africans were fully human, also with rights to be fully respected, lives to be cared for profoundly. So New England built its economy on a sailing trade that moved between Boston and Newport to the shores of West Africa, where kidnapped slaves were forced aboard. Ships crossed to Caribbean islands where massive plantations grew sugar with the native and black forced labor. Then the slavers returned to New England where molasses became rum to be exported to Africa in exchange for more slaves. The purveyors of this heinous market knew the Bible stories we read on Sundays. But what they heard about slavery, about the value of all God's children, was different from what we hear, isn't it? The parable Jesus tells about a rich man and poor Lazarus focuses on these questions. What do we hear? When are we utterly deaf? A rich man feasts daily while only steps away Lazarus lies, ill with sores, starving for food, dreaming of the leftovers from the rich man's table. But he gets none. The only consolation Lazarus receives in life is from the town dogs, who lick his sores as they would their own, an animal instinct to care for him. Now, some might say Jesus' story is about heaven and hell, or the huge chasm that separates rich from poor in both life and afterlife, and there is claim for that. But today, notice with me the point at the very end of the story. The rich man thwarted in his previous requests that he himself be made more comfortable, now begs Father Abraham to at least dispatch Lazarus as a messenger boy to the rich man's 5 brothers, still living, so that those brothers might be warned and when they die avoid the torment the rich man now suffers. Abraham declines. Your brothers already have all the teaching of Moses and all the prophets, he explains. Your brothers should listen to them. Because it's not a hard lesson to hear or understand. Humans are made to love one another. It's our purpose. Love the way that you would like to be loved. Treat everyone as a child of God. No, 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 protests the rich man. If my brothers hear from a ghost, then they'll listen. Send Lazarus, rejoins Abraham. If your brothers will not listen to Moses and all the prophets, they won't be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead and speaks to them. The parable of Lazarus and the rich man makes us ask, what is it we don't hear? What do the prophets of the Old Testament teach, but we're not listening? What was said in the New Testament by a man who does rise from the dead, and still we ignore his messages? The rich man has a twofold problem. First, he never hears the lesson that Lazarus is another child of Father Abraham, another human, as deserving of the rich man's respect, as worthy of the rich man's love as his 5 brothers are. The rich man can't fathom that, even after he sees Lazarus lying right there with Abraham. Instead, throughout the parable, the rich man relegates Lazarus to a servant status, a person of less worth, destined only to comfort the rich man. Oh, Lazarus, bring me water to cool my tongue. Lazarus, be off and deliver this note to my brothers so that they're spared pain. Hurry up now. When we can't imagine someone as a person with a full life as complex and rich as our own, we are deaf to this critical lesson of Jesus and all the prophets. We are all one, all made in God's image. Are we really listening? The rich man's second problem is that he's distracted by too many other things to ever quite make time for Lazarus, hungering only a few feet away. Errands can consume a day. After all, purple clothes need high-end care at the dry cleaner. The linen frock is always wrinkled. The menu for the day must be planned, appetizers, a soup course, and the wine selection. Life fills with things on which our energies can be expended. So there's no energy left at the day's end to put leftovers on a paper plate and carry it out to Lazarus. No time to sit with him for a moment. No time to listen to the prophets who thunder their demand to establish justice in the gate. How do we fare here at King's Chapel when compared to the rich man in the parable? Are there any whose humanity we do not fully respect by our actions, if not our words? Who is equivalent to the Native Americans? Who are equivalent to the Africans of our forebears' time? Who is our Lazarus today? Sadly, there are candidates aplenty for whom history will judge us, saying we can't possibly have seen them as fully human or we would not have ignored their plight. Homeless women and men, Lazarus at our gate, asleep in our common. Refugees of wars we've fomented refused entry to our shores. The poorest in Boston who work full-time at minimum wage and can't afford an apartment, sleeping at Pine Street Inn. Children in our schools who can't handle college work after they graduate, the mentally ill and addicted with no treatment beds. Prisoners who upon release can't get jobs. The transgender community, scorned and now pilloried as predators without any cause. Themselves the ones at great risk of violence. Soldiers who can't get timely trauma care. Immigrants, those who are strangers in a strange land, just as Father Abraham's own children once were, the prophets remind the people. Honor immigrants. It's a long list, the modern-day Lazarus, though we are a nation of plenty. As equally odd that Lazarus was so hungry, only feet from a rich man's banquet. Wouldn't it be seen just that way later? We don't intend to be deaf to the lessons we know well. What distracts us from the needs of our modern Lazarus? Writer Brian Mahan suggests 3 tendencies that we all have, that though we do intend to help, we end up doing little. It rings a bell with me. We see solutions as all or nothing. We convince ourselves that the cause is hopeless, or we procrastinate, thinking we'll be able to help more later, but then never begin. You see, a friend asks me to volunteer with her at a shelter 2 hours a month. I soon see how much more could be done if I came 2 hours a week, or if I spend a vacation week helping, and soon it's all or nothing thinking for me. Because after volunteering for my vacation week, I know that homelessness is caused by failures of mental health veterans deployed too often, inadequate reimbursement to doctors for addiction treatment, the thousands of affordable housing units that must be built. It's practically hopeless, and my 2 hours a month are barely even a Band-Aid. Given the scope of the need, I'll be far better able to serve once I have completed my degree, once the kids are older, after I've earned a bundle so I can make a major gift. When I retire, when I have more free time, we meant to help. We're not all hard of hearing. This past week, PBS began airing the compelling history of Witzel and Martha Sharp, a Unitarian minister and his wife from Wellesley with 2 young children. In 1939, the Sharps are called to the home of a senior Unitarian Association official. You've been chosen, he tells the Sharps, to go to Europe and save refugees endangered by the Nazis. It will be very dangerous, but we need to do this as people of faith. Sir, Reverend Sharp asks, how many ministers before me have you approached with this assignment? 17. 17 others had very good reasons for not hearing the call, had young children like the Sharps, had a congregation that needed care like the Sharps, feared for their lives like the Sharps, but the Sharps listened. And film producer Ken Burns brings before us viewers the faces of the men and women alive only because of the Sharps. The Sharps listen, but the country as a whole is largely deaf until Pearl Harbor. Martha Sharp is shocked on her return to the U.S. with refugees she saved, how unaware her fellow citizens are of the violence and turmoil in Europe in those early days. Americans couldn't hear the cries of Europe's refugees because they were still caught in the Great Depression, intones Burns, still weary from World War I. People were distracted by baseball, Martha Sharp reports. That's what people were listening to. What enables the Sharps to hear the call of the prophets, while others of us are distracted as good as deaf? Don't individual relationships establish each other's humanity? Individual voices become clearly audible over the din of all life's demands. 15 years ago, a family from church came for dinner. Their son's about my kid's age, and one of the moms worked with me in the kitchen, preparing excellent guacamole. She diced the tomatoes very, very, very finely. I used to be a surgeon, she explained. Before Lynn and I adopted the boys, they needed more of our time, so I left the hospital. Their family, like my husband and me, 2 parents weighing how to care for the kids, balance our professions. When the equal marriage legislation is proposed, I know she and Lynn must have the rights Bob and I have. Another family at another past church comes to the evening service on Sunday, always rising to light candles. For weeks they stand silently as their flame flickers. Slowly they offer out loud before our gathered community their quiet, worried prayers for their college daughter. Months later, we learn that she may take her own life. A child the same age as mine, both daughters far from home. More months pass. The parents begin attending PFLAG meetings to learn about transgender issues. And when their child comes to meet us as a young man, he is alive, finally himself. His parents become active to protect his rights. I hear their voices and will stand with them. For this same reason, I make myself watch the searing videos of blacks killed by police, hearing the voices, seeing the faces across our nation. I can't breathe. He had a license to carry. Why did you shoot him? Mommy, don't worry. He has a traumatic brain injury. Don't do it, don't do it. And the fire and the gunshot is heard. The husband is dead. If we cannot hear, how do we listen? How do we train ourselves to listen for our common humanity? And how do we mute the buzz of distractions so we hear what's most important? Former President Bill Clinton told this story to Neil deGrasse Tyson, host of a science show. On the table in the Oval Office in the White House, where heads of state sit around and argue, Clinton had on loan from NASA a moon rock. Anytime the conversation wasn't working out or the tensions were rising, President Clinton would point to that moon rock and say, pause. See that moon rock? It's 3.6 billion years old. Now we're all just passing through here and we don't have very much time, so let's just calm down and figure out what the right thing to do is. And it worked every single time, Clinton reported. We are not so different or distinct from one another, says Tyson. We're all participants in the great unfolding of one cosmic story. Here's the good news, the source of our hope, we still have time. We are not dead. We are still alive. We have the opportunity yet ahead of us to hear well, to love well. We are not forever destined like that rich man to wish we had once heard the prophet's call to care for the sick or heal the wounded or take care of the poor. We can hear those lessons right now, can listen, and love. Amen.